Hey everyone, I'm Kat, and today we're setting up PostgreSQL on a Linux server, making sure that it's listening on the right port, and then locking it down so we don't have a security disaster. After that, we'll use Nmap from a Kali Linux machine to check if it's actually working. We'll keep this simple, no full database setup, just installation, basic configuration, and security hardening. If you're running a Linux server and need a solid database, PostgreSQL is a great option. But leaving it wide open is just asking for trouble. So I'll show you how to tighten it up. Let's get started. All right, first, what is PostgreSQL and why do we care? PostgreSQL, or just Postgres, is one of the best open source relational databases out there. It's used just pretty much by everyone, from small developers to massive enterprises, because it's fast, flexible, and can handle some seriously complex queries. It's also super extensible, meaning you can tweak it and add features depending on what you need. But why are we setting this up on Linux? Well, because Linux is just more secure, more stable, and overall a better choice for running databases compared to, say, Windows. If you're already using Linux for networking or for security practice, adding Postgres into the mix just makes sense. Now let's get this thing installed. All right. Getting PostgreSQL up and running on a Linux server is pretty straightforward. First, we update the system so we're working with the latest packages. Then we install PostgreSQL along with some necessary utilities. Once it's installed, we start the PostgreSQL service and enable it so it automatically runs on boot. At this point, Postgres is technically running, but it's only listening on the local machine. If we want to access it from another system, like our Kali Linux box, we need to tweak the settings just a little bit. By default, PostgreSQL is locked down to local hosts only, as we said before. That's great for security, but useless if you actually want to connect remotely. To fix this, we need to change a couple of the configuration files. First, we edit the PostgreSQL configuration file and tell it to listen for external connections instead of just local ones. Then we modify the authentication file to actually allow those connections. After making those changes, we restart PostgreSQL so it applies the new settings. At this point, in theory, Postgres should be accepting connections from other machines. But we're not just going to assume it's working, we're going to test it. This is where the Nmap comes in from the Kali server, so pay a little bit closer attention here. All right, so let's see if Postgres is actually listening on the right port. We'll use Nmap from a Kali Linux machine to scan the server and check if port 5432 is open. If everything is configured correctly, the scan should come back showing that the Postgres service is up and running. If it doesn't show up, something went wrong. Maybe the firewall is blocking it, maybe the configuration didn't apply properly. Either way, if it's not showing up here, this is the easiest way to confirm that it's working. All right, so now theoretically that it's reachable, let's make sure we implement some hardening steps and we're not going to be an easy target. The first thing that we need to do is we need to secure PostgreSQL and its restricted access. Right now, it's set to accept connections from anywhere, which is an open invitation for attackers to kind of mess with it. To fix this, we go back into the configuration and tell PostgreSQL to only allow connections from trusted IPs. This way, only specific machines can reach it instead of the entire internet. Once we update that setting, we restart PostgreSQL again so the changes take effect. With that, we've already cut down a huge chunk of risk, but we're not exactly done yet. We have 2 more steps to go. Next up, our second step, we're going to fix authentication because default settings aren't great right now. By default, Postgres uses MD5 hashing for passwords, which is pretty outdated in terms of like industry standard. Instead of using that, we're going to use ScramSha256, which is way more secure. To do that, we update the authentication file, change the hashing method, and then we just basically restart Postgres again. Now, any new passwords that are stored in Postgres, only the new ones, will be using a stronger hashing method, making it a lot easier for management and also making it a lot harder for attackers to brute force through that password. Um, so now that's 2 security improvements down, 1 more to go. The last thing we need to do is disable unnecessary features that could make PostgreSQL more vulnerable. Out of the box, it allows public database connections, which we don't really need. We're going to revoke unnecessary permissions and make sure that only approved users can actually access the database. Once we've done that, we restart PostgreSQL one last time. And at this point, our setup is not just working, it's locked down and a lot harder to mess with. All right, let's do a quick recap, everybody. We installed PostgreSQL on a Linux server, configured it to listen on the right port, and tested it using Nmap from a Kali Linux machine. Then we secured it by doing 3 things. 1, restricting remote access. 2, switching to stronger authentication. 3, disabling unnecessary permissions. At this point, PostgreSQL is up, running, and actually secure. Here are my list of references. I used quite a bit this time. Actually, not really in terms of what I used last time, but we have a couple that are just mostly manuals. I find that if you go to the manual section of a lot of the operating systems that this stuff like uses, they actually have a lot of good documentation about like how to do the setup step by step. So if you ever feel like I missed something for you, or you feel like there might not necessarily be a ton of detail that you can kind of see on your screen, you can always go to these and they have images and stuff that you can use to go step by step. Well, that's it, everybody. Postgre is installed, configured, and not a security nightmare. If you found this useful, let me know. If you've got other topics you want covered, drop them in the comments below. See you on the next one.